In the dying light of a sun that had slipped almost completely behind the horizon, the land looked ordinary: rolling dunes, scattered scrub, the jagged silhouettes of distant hills, but beneath those windswept sands lay something that should not exist. The world knows its ancient wonders: the pyramids of Giza, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the megalithic temples of Malta. These are the monuments humanity points to when speaking of the first cities. They are built from stone, wood, clay, materials our ancestors could shape with the crude tools and technologies of their age. Metal, at least in the popular timeline, came later. The Bronze Age marks the dawn of widespread metalwork, and even then it was reserved for weapons, tools, ornaments, not entire cities. Yet here, buried in silence for thousands of years, was a metropolis made not of stone or brick, but entirely of metal. Towers of bronze, walls of copper, plazas paved with plates of some strange silver-gold alloy. It was a city that should not be, one that history has no place for. The first hints came from a satellite pass, just an accidental photograph in a sweep meant for geological mapping. Beneath the sand, certain shapes caught the light in ways that suggested they were unnaturally reflective. Analysts wrote it off as exposed rock formations, mica perhaps, but the angles were too precise, the geometry too clean. Something about those gleaming lines seemed deliberate, intentional. Still, even the most imaginative among the team would not have guessed what lay there. The desert had been a graveyard for many civilizations. It was not strange to imagine an old ruin beneath the surface. But this was something else entirely, something that would demand a rewriting of every neat, comfortable chart in the textbooks. When the first excavation teams arrived, they worked under the assumption that they might find stone ruins coated in some kind of mineral deposit. Instead, their shovels rang, not the muffled thud of earth against buried rock, but the sharp, resonant clang of metal struck by metal. It was so startling that one worker thought he had hit a buried vehicle, some modern wreckage. But when the sand was cleared, they uncovered a flat, burnished surface that ran on, unbroken, like a plaza floor cast from a single sheet. No joints, no visible seams. The sunlight caught it and sent a cold fire into their eyes. It was then that the scale of their discovery began to sink in. From that first moment, everything about this place challenged what we thought we knew. According to the accepted timeline, large-scale metallurgy is an achievement of relatively late human history, and even the most advanced ancient societies used metal sparingly because it was difficult to extract, refine, and shape. A city made entirely of it would require an industrial infrastructure capable of smelting and alloying on a massive scale, something supposedly impossible 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. And yet, the radiocarbon data from organic material trapped in its foundations suggested an age of over 7,500 years. If those numbers held, then this city predated the pyramids by more than 2 millennia. It stood in defiance of the slow, orderly progression we've been taught: stone to bronze to iron, hunter to farmer to city builder. The mainstream view of history paints human civilization as a steady climb. Small bands of hunter-gatherers become villages, villages grow into towns, towns into cities. Metal emerges as a luxury, then a utility, then the backbone of empires. The story is clean, reassuring, but the hidden truth lurking beneath these sands told a messier story, one in which a sophisticated civilization could rise early, master techniques ahead of its time, and then vanish so completely that its memory is erased, its achievements reduced to myth. To accept this city as real is to accept that the past is not a straight line, but a broken, looping trail, scattered with forgotten peaks. As the dig widened, the shape of the city emerged. Jagged towers rose from the sand like the bones of some mechanical giant. Streets ran in perfect alignment, paved with interlocking panels, whose edges were as sharp as the day they were laid. Temples, plazas, and archways stood untouched by corrosion, as if they had been forged yesterday, rather than thousands of years ago. The archaeologists on site spoke in whisper, not because the place was sacred, though it felt that way, but because the implications were almost too heavy to voice aloud. Each discovery was a blow to the comfortable certainties of their field. This was not just a matter of strange architecture. The very materials were baffling. Samples sent to metallurgical labs showed compositions unknown to modern engineering, metals fused with trace elements in ways that enhanced hardness and corrosion resistance beyond anything in the historical record. One alloy resisted all conventional attempts at cutting or drilling. Another gleamed with an iridescence that shifted under changing light, as though the surface itself was alive. These were not primitive smelting experiments. They were the products of a metallurgical science more advanced than ours in certain respects, yet their makers lived in an age when, according to our understanding, such science should have been impossible. The story of this city is also the story of how we choose to interpret the past. On one side are those who insist on fitting every new discovery into the existing framework, no matter how much it strains. To them, the city must be a later construction, its dating flawed, its scale exaggerated. On the other side are those who see in it evidence of a lost chapter of humanity, a civilization erased from history by catastrophe, by deliberate suppression, or by the sheer passage of time. Both camps agree on one thing: if the city is as old as the data suggests, then our entire model of early human history must be rewritten. And so we begin in a moment of tension, between the known and the hidden, between what we are told to believe and what the evidence demands we consider. This city, glittering beneath the desert's skin, is more than an archaeological anomaly. It is a mirror, held up to our assumptions about who we are and where we came from. Its metal streets and shining towers force us to confront an uncomfortable question: what else lies buried, waiting to tell a story we have forgotten, or perhaps one we never knew at all? The journey ahead will not just uncover artifacts and ruins, it will strip back the layers of narrative we have wrapped around our origins. And as we descend deeper into the gleaming heart of the oldest known city built entirely of metal, the line between history and legend will grow thinner, until they are one and the same. Buried beneath an unbroken expanse of ochre sand, the city remained hidden for thousands of years, sealed away from both the destructive hands of time and the curiosity of humankind. To the casual traveler, this part of the desert seemed like any other, a monotonous landscape of shifting dunes, heat-shimmering horizons, and the occasional stubborn shrub. Yet the truth was that every footstep crossed over an invisible roof. For centuries, sandstorms had swept over these ruins like a constant tide, slowly filling the streets, piling against the tower, and ultimately swallowing the skyline whole. The question that haunts researchers is whether this burial was an accident of nature or the outcome of deliberate concealment. The sands can be both a destroyer and a guardian, preserving what they entomb as effectively as they erase it from the world's memory. Archaeologists, when they speak of the luck of rediscovering such places, often overlook the improbability of it. This city was not marked on ancient maps, nor was it hinted at in surviving local legends in any direct, traceable way. Its existence was pieced together like a detective reconstructing a crime from scattered clues, an unusual concentration of metallic fragments unearthed in a nearby settlement, a centuries-old travel account describing a shining ruin, glimpsed during a caravan's detour, and the strange, glinting lines spotted from satellite imagery decades later. At first, no one connected these disparate pieces. It was only when a team reanalyzing those orbital photographs noticed the perfect angular shapes beneath the surface that the possibility of an artificial structure came into focus. The initial survey expedition was small, underfunded, and skeptical. Many assumed the site would yield little more than a few stray artifacts, perhaps an abandoned copper mine or a collapsed fortress. Yet from the moment the first trench was dug, the site began to tell a different story. The sand was thick and heavy, layered in alternating bands, evidence of multiple covering events. Between these layers, the excavators found signs of sudden inundation, compacted silt, traces of organic matter from what had once been lush vegetation. This suggested that the city had not always been surrounded by desert. In fact, geological analysis showed that millennia ago this region had been part of a fertile basin, threaded with rivers and dotted with lakes. Something had transformed that green world into an arid wasteland, sealing the city away. Mainstream scholars lean toward climate change as the culprit, slow shifts in monsoon patterns, compounded by overgrazing and deforestation, leading to the desertification of the land. The burial, in their view, was a gradual process, the sands creeping year by year until nothing was left but the occasional hump of a buried roofline. But not everyone is convinced. Alternative researchers point to the unnatural uniformity of the sand cover. The way the city appears to have been entombed in a single catastrophic event. Could a massive sandstorm, perhaps triggered by a volcanic eruption or meteor strike, have done the work in days instead of centuries? Or was it something more deliberate, a desperate attempt to hide the city from an advancing enemy, or even from the knowledge of future generations? The question becomes more tangled when considering the absence of any scavenging. Normally, an abandoned city, especially one rich in metals, would be stripped bare by opportunistic neighbors within years, even months. Yet here, the towers, the streets, the plazas remained untouched. There were no signs of looting, no tool marks on the metal walls, no piles of salvaged scraps. It was as though the city had been locked away, sealed not just physically but in memory, its location forgotten by design or by some unspoken cultural agreement. For proponents of the deliberate burial theory, this is the strongest evidence of all. If the city's creators feared that their knowledge or their materials might be misused, hiding the city beneath the desert's shifting veil would have been an effective choice. The first wide-scale excavation efforts were cautious. Large machinery was avoided for fear of damaging the structures beneath. Teams worked by hand, brushing away layer after layer, each revealing a little more of the city's gleaming anatomy. At first, only the tops of a few metallic towers emerged, their surfaces reflecting the brutal desert sun in ways that made them seem to glow from within. Then came the outlines of plazas, the straight, unwavering lines of streets, details that made it clear this was not a scattering of isolated buildings, but an entire urban grid. The city had been preserved in a way that defied common archaeological experience. Organic materials, wood, cloth, even traces of food, were found sealed in airtight chambers, unspoiled by time. It was as though the city had been placed in a time capsule. Even in these early days of uncovering, the tension between the official narrative and the growing body of anomalous evidence began to simmer. Government agencies overseeing the dig pushed for restrained public statements. Preliminary findings, they said, suggest a settlement of considerable size, with unusual construction materials. Privately, members of the excavation team whispered about the impossibility of what they were seeing. "This isn't just unusual," one researcher reportedly said off the record. "This changes everything." As the sand was cleared away, and the first aerial photographs were released, comparisons to other lost cities began to surface. Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley, Heraclion beneath the waters off Egypt, the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde. Yet there was a crucial difference: those cities fit, however loosely, into the accepted narrative of human development. This one did not. It was older than it had any right to be. It was too well preserved. And most disconcerting of all, it was made entirely of metals that should have corroded, warped or crumbled into nothing over the thousands of years it had been hidden. In the public's imagination, the buried city began to take on a mythic quality. Some called it the Shining Atlantis, others, the Desert Forge. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was evidence of a prehistoric industrial society, while more conservative voices urged patience, insisting that science would eventually find a logical explanation. Between these extremes, the dig continued, methodical and slow, each bucket of sand bringing the world closer to an answer, or perhaps to a deeper, more unsettling mystery. By the time the central avenues were uncovered, a new question had emerged. If the sands had preserved the city so perfectly, what else might they have preserved? Stories, knowledge, perhaps even technology beyond anything we have yet imagined. The next step would be to go inside, to see the interiors of these impossible buildings. But first, the team needed to understand the layout, the scale, the boundaries of what they were dealing with. The sands had buried the city, yes, but had they also buried the truth about why it vanished? And so, with the towers gleaming in the unforgiving sun and the desert wind whispering across the dig site, the excavation stood on the edge of revelation. The world knew that a city had been found, but not yet what it meant. That part of the story was still sleeping under the sand, waiting for someone brave enough to dig deeper. The moment the first full view of the city emerged from the sand, the excavation site shifted from a quiet academic project to something that felt almost cinematic. As the wind cleared the air after a long day's digging, a line of metallic spires caught the last golden blaze of the setting sun. At first, the team thought they were looking at isolated structures, ornamental towers perhaps, but as the sand was pushed back further, the silhouettes connected into a skyline of metal. The effect was jarring, almost surreal, as though someone had lifted the heart of a modern industrial city and dropped it in the middle of antiquity. The human eye is conditioned to expect decay from metal, especially over long stretches of time. Iron rusts, copper greens, bronze dulls to a muted brown. But here, in the middle of a desert where sand and wind should have scoured everything to dust, the towers shone as if they had been polished the day before. From the ground their surfaces looked impossibly smooth. No pitting, no visible welds, not even the faint irregularities one might expect from hand-forged panels. Some reflected light in a steady mirror-like sheen, while others seemed to glow faintly with a warm internal radiance, an effect scientists later struggled to reproduce under laboratory conditions. Standing before those spires, the archaeologists were forced to question not only the age of the city, but its very plausibility. How could structures like this exist without any record in the histories of surrounding cultures? If this place had been a center of commerce, art, or power, surely its memory would have persisted somewhere, in legends, in trade records, in oral traditions. Yet there was nothing. The historical silence surrounding the site was as disconcerting as the towers themselves. Mainstream explanations began cautiously. Perhaps this was a much younger city than initial dating suggested, built with an unusually high level of craftsmanship for its time. The gleaming surfaces could be the result of some natural preservative effect unique to the desert's climate, combined with an unusually pure metal source. But these theories began to fray when samples were tested. Metallurgical analysis revealed alloys that did not match any known recipes from recorded history, some containing trace elements arranged in patterns that hinted at deliberate molecular manipulation. This was not merely a matter of pure ore and good preservation. It suggested knowledge of metalworking far beyond the supposed capabilities of the era. Walking down what had once been the main avenue, the team found more wonders. The street itself was a seamless expanse of metallic plates, each etched with faint flowing patterns, possibly decorative, possibly functional. The plates locked together in a way that suggested not only advanced engineering, but also a deep understanding of structural stress distribution. Even the joins between panels resisted separation, as though they had fused over time into a single continuous surface. And then there were the doorways, tall, arched openings, framed by metals that shifted in hue, depending on the angle of light, ranging from pale silver to a deep, warm gold. One of the most striking moments came when a researcher, brushing away sand from the base of a tower, revealed a recessed panel that still held a sharp, detailed engraving. It depicted the city itself, surrounded by something like a river or channel of molten metal, with smaller spires radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel. Some took this as a symbolic representation of the city's power and influence. Others saw it as a literal blueprint, perhaps showing a smelting or refining process on a civic scale. The beauty of the skyline was undeniable, but so was its strangeness. The proportions of the buildings were unlike anything in early urban architecture, slender yet impossibly tall, as though the builders had mastered both the materials and the physics of weight distribution. Balconies projected outward without visible supports. Bridges arched between towers at dizzying heights, their undersides lined with tiny repeating geometric shapes that could have been purely ornamental or could have served some unknown function. Photographs of the skyline caused a sensation when leaked to the wider archaeological community. Experts in ancient architecture struggled to identify a precedent. Some compared the shapes to Art Deco motifs, others to futuristic design principles. The resemblance to certain speculative visions of cities of tomorrow from early 20th century science fiction was uncanny, though the city before them was thousands of years older. It was as if someone in deep antiquity had not only conceived of but executed an architectural style that modern designers would not reinvent until millennia later. For the workers on site, the skyline had an almost hypnotic effect. During breaks, some sat silently, just looking up at it, trying to reconcile what they saw with what they knew. Others spoke of the unsettling feeling that the city was not entirely dead, that in some intangible way it was still awake, listening, watching. At night, when the excavation lights cast long shadows across the spires, the city looked like a forest of frozen lightning. The official press releases framed the discovery in measured terms, an unprecedented example of ancient metallurgy, potentially representing a ceremonial or symbolic use of metal in architecture. But the restrained language could not hide the fact that something extraordinary had been uncovered. Behind closed doors, senior members of the excavation admitted that the skyline's preservation, the materials used, and the lack of any surrounding ruins or suburbs were not just unusual, they were inexplicable within the current understanding of early civilizations. In interviews, a few risked going further. "It's not just that this city shouldn't exist," one said, "it's that it exists in a way that feels intentional, purposeful, as though someone wanted it to endure long after its makers were gone." That comment, once repeated, began to take on a life of its own. People began to ask, if the city was built to last, then for whom? For the builders' descendants, for future civilizations, or for someone, or something else entirely. By the time the excavation had cleared enough of the city to reveal its full skyline, the dig was no longer simply about uncovering an ancient ruin. It had become a hunt for the truth behind a visual impossibility. The towers and streets were not just artifacts, they were clues, and each gleam of sunlight off their metallic surfaces seemed to whisper that the past was far more complex and far more alien to our assumptions than we have ever dared to believe. The dating results came back like a thunderclap. For weeks, samples of charred wood, fragments of woven fiber, and traces of organic residue trapped between metallic seams had been sent to independent laboratories across 3 continents. The goal was to triangulate a credible age for the city, something that could either confirm or disprove the wild claims circulating in both academic circles and late-night conspiracy forums. The consensus, when it came, was staggering: 7,500 years, give or take a century. In archaeological terms, that placed the city firmly in the Neolithic period, an age when, according to established history, humans were still building with mud brick and stone, still learning to domesticate animals, still experimenting with the earliest forms of writing. The problem was that this city was not Neolithic. Its materials, its construction methods, its scale, none of it belonged to that era. If the dates were correct, then the builders had somehow leapfrogged millennia of gradual technological evolution, mastering metallurgy on a scale that wouldn't appear in the mainstream timeline until the height of the Roman Empire, and even then, not to this extent. It was the kind of historical contradiction that couldn't simply be filed away in a footnote. To accept the evidence meant acknowledging that our model of human progress was incomplete, perhaps dangerously so. Mainstream archaeologists moved quickly to find a workaround. They proposed that the dated materials, charred timber, woven matting, might have come from an earlier occupation of the site, long before the metal structures were erected. In this view, the city might be far younger than the organic debris suggested, built atop older settlements whose remnants had been sealed beneath the metallic foundations. It was a plausible idea, and it allowed the orthodox narrative to remain intact. But it didn't explain everything. If the city was truly younger, why were there no signs of the earlier stone or mud brick phases? Why did the metallic architecture sit directly atop undisturbed natural strata, as if it had been built on virgin ground? And why did metallurgical testing place the manufacture of the alloys themselves at the same improbable age as the organic material? Privately, some scientists admitted their discomfort. A few metallurgists, examining the samples under electron microscopes, noted structural patterns in the alloys, uniform grain distributions, perfectly aligned microcrystals that suggested deliberate engineering at the molecular level. This isn't just early metallurgy, one said in a closed seminar. This is metallurgy with a level of precision we haven't matched until the last century, and if the dating holds, it means someone was doing this thousands of years before they were supposed to. For alternative historians, the dating was a revelation. They argued that it confirmed long-held suspicions of a lost global culture that flourished in deep prehistory before collapsing in some catastrophic event. To them, this city was a surviving fragment of that world, a place where advanced technologies had been concentrated, then entombed, either by disaster or by design. In their telling, the 7500-year date was not an anomaly but a beacon, pointing to a hidden chapter in the human story. The official institutions were less eager to embrace such conclusions. Press releases described the dating results as preliminary and subject to further verification. Funding agencies quietly encouraged the excavation team to focus on more traditionally explainable aspects of the site. Even the choice of which lab results to publish became a matter of debate. Some in the team felt a creeping sense of déjà vu, recalling other archaeological anomalies that had been quietly shelved, their data locked away in archives until public interest faded. The dating controversy also drew in specialists from other fields. Paleoclimatologists studied the sediment layers for signs of regional upheaval, volcanic eruptions, sudden droughts, seismic events that could have prompted such a city to rise and fall in relative isolation. Geneticists looked at remains from nearby burial sites, searching for evidence of a population distinct from surrounding Neolithic communities. Every new piece of data either deepened the mystery or fractured it into more competing theories. In the public imagination, the date became the most potent part of the story. News outlets ran headlines like 7500-year-old metal city defies history, an ancient industrial metropolis unearthed in the desert. Talk shows speculated about ancient aliens, time travel, or secret prehistoric empire. Academic purists dismissed such ideas as sensationalist, but even they struggled to fit the facts into the clean chronological boxes of conventional history. The most haunting part of the dating puzzle was not just its implications for the past, but what it suggested about the fragility of human achievement. If a civilization capable of such advanced metallurgy could exist so early and then vanish so completely, what did that say about our own permanence? Was the arc of progress truly as inevitable as we like to believe, or could it be broken, reset, erased? As the debate raged, the excavation pushed on, revealing more of the city's impossible architecture. The dating results hung over every discovery like a shadow, forcing every observer, whether scholar, skeptic, or dreamer, to grapple with a single inescapable question: if this city truly stood here 7,500 years ago, then what else have we forgotten about our own beginnings? And perhaps more unsettling, what else is still waiting to be found? The deeper the excavation went, the clearer it became that the city was not just remarkable for its age or its metallurgy. It was an architectural enigma. From the plazas to the tallest towers, every structure seemed to follow a design philosophy that was alien to the known styles of early civilizations. Instead of the heavy, load-bearing stone blocks seen in Mesopotamian ziggurats or Egyptian temples, these buildings soared upward in slender, graceful forms, their strength coming entirely from the properties of their metallic skeletons and skins. Columns no wider than a man's arm supported entire upper levels. Balconies projected far into open air without any visible supports. Even the tallest spires, some rising the equivalent of 20 modern stories, stood perfectly straight, resisting the subtle lean or warp one might expect after thousands of years. The streets themselves were works of engineering art. Wide, arrow-straight avenues cut through the city in precise alignments, their surfaces made of large interlocking panels that looked poured and cast rather than hammered or riveted. When archaeologists examined these panels up close, they found no signs of seams or fastening mechanisms. It was as though each street had been made from a single continuous sheet, poured in place with exacting control over molten metal. Even more baffling, some surfaces displayed geometric reliefs that were neither purely decorative nor random. They followed repeating patterns consistent with waveforms or mathematical sequences. Were these markings symbolic, artistic, or part of some structural or energetic function? No one could say for sure. Inside the buildings, the mystery only deepened. Walls were lined with panels of a dark, mirror-polished alloy that reflected light so perfectly it was disorienting to walk through narrow corridors. In certain rooms, the panels were inlaid with faintly glowing veins of a silvery material that seemed to emit light without any heat, a feature modern scientists could not replicate with the same materials in their labs. The interiors followed unusual geometries, with angled ceilings and curved doorways that gave each space an almost organic feel, as though the architecture had been inspired by the forms of shells, bones, or plant structures rather than by straight lines and right angles. Conventional historians argued that these designs could be explained as a purely aesthetic choice, an artistic culture experimenting with form. But to others, the architecture hinted at knowledge of materials science and engineering far ahead of its time. The balance of weight, the seamless joining of metals, the apparent resistance to environmental wear, it all suggested mastery of construction principles that even modern skyscraper designers would find challenging without steel, cranes, and computer modeling. One of the most striking features of the city's architecture was its integration with open space. Plazas were not merely flat areas for gathering, they were framed by curved metallic colonnades that seemed to channel wind and shade in deliberate ways, making them cooler and more comfortable even under the desert sun. Elevated walkways connected buildings across multiple levels, creating a layered cityscape that allowed for movement above the street level. The higher tiers were decorated with intricate latticework of unknown alloys, some so fine they should have collapsed under their own weight, yet they stood without even the faintest deformation. Then there were the anomalies, the features that simply did not belong in any known ancient city. In several structures, the team found cylindrical shafts running straight through multiple floors, perfectly smooth inside, as if bored with precision drills. Some ended abruptly in sealed chambers, others opened into strange hexagonal hollows embedded in the metallic framework. Nearby, thin channels, no wider than a finger, ran along walls and floors in complex networks, branching and rejoining in ways that resembled modern electrical conduits or fluid piping. There was no direct evidence yet of what they carried, but their arrangement suggested that the city had once been alive with some form of distributed energy or resource system. Mainstream archaeologists hesitated to describe these features in such terms, preferring to label them unknown architectural elements. But to the alternative researchers brought in unofficially by members of the team, the implications were obvious. This was infrastructure, not decoration. Whether it carried water, air, or electricity-like currents, the city had been designed as an integrated system, more like a machine than a settlement. The alloys themselves continued to defy explanation. Tests revealed combinations of metals and trace elements that were theoretically possible but should have been far beyond the capabilities of early metallurgy. Some incorporated rare earth elements in proportions that could only be achieved through repeated refining and precise temperature control. Others had grain structures, indicating cooling rates that suggested advanced casting techniques, possibly even the controlled use of pressure or vacuum conditions to eliminate imperfections. If the builders had somehow mastered such methods, they would have been capable of producing metalwork on par with or exceeding modern aerospace standards. Yet, for all its complexity, the architecture was also deeply human in scale. Doorways, seating areas, and sleeping chambers all conformed to proportions that matched the human body. There was nothing to suggest the inhabitants were anything other than human, albeit humans with skills, tools, and knowledge that should have been unimaginable for their time. As more of the city emerged from the sand, its sheer size became apparent. This was no small fortress or ceremonial center. It was a sprawling metropolis, planned and executed with precision. Every street, plaza, and building was part of a coherent whole. The city's metallic skeleton was not an afterthought or a veneer. It was the very essence of its construction, woven into every beam, plate, and panel, and that perhaps was the most confounding detail of all. This was a city built entirely of metal, not because its builders lacked other materials, but because they chose it deliberately, as though stone, wood, or clay simply would not do. The contrast between what the orthodox historical model says should exist here, simple dwellings of mud and reed, and what actually rose from the sands was almost too vast to comprehend. To accept this architecture as genuine meant admitting that somewhere in humanity's deep past, a culture had achieved an industrial mastery we are only beginning to appreciate today. Whether this was an isolated spark of brilliance, or a fragment of a much larger, now lost world would become the next, and perhaps most important, question the dig would have to face. If the architecture was the city's skin and bones, then its metallurgy was its beating heart, the element that transformed it from a mere settlement into an impossibility. Every artifact pulled from the ground seemed to challenge a different assumption about the limits of early human technology. The first ingots recovered from a collapsed storehouse were unlike any known ancient metal. Instead of the dull gray or coppery hues familiar from Bronze Age relics, these pieces gleamed with a deep, liquid-like sheen, as though the metal had been freshly polished despite lying buried for millennia. Under sunlight, they reflected not only light but also faint iridescent colors that shifted with the angle of view, hinting at microscopic surface structures engineered for specific optical effects. Initial metallurgical analysis was equally unsettling. Samples contained a base metal consistent with iron, yet alloyed with precise amounts of nickel, vanadium, and molybdenum, elements that in our modern era are deliberately added to steel to create high-performance alloys used in aerospace, turbine blades, and deep-sea equipment. This was not an accidental mixture of impurities. The ratios were exact, repeated identically across samples from different sites in the city. Achieving this level of control required both a deep understanding of metallurgy and the ability to maintain extremely high, stable temperatures during smelting, something believed to be well beyond the reach of any culture before the first millennium BCE. The excavation also revealed metallic components that defied explanation altogether. Thin sheets of a flexible, silvery alloy were found wrapped around the inner framework of certain structures. These sheets could be bent and folded without breaking, yet when released, they snapped back to their original form without any sign of fatigue. The team tested one sample by folding it thousands of times. Modern aluminum foil or copper sheet would have torn long before, and yet it remained perfectly intact. This so-called memory metal phenomenon was unknown in history until its rediscovery in the 20th century with nickel-titanium alloys. How could a civilization thousands of years earlier have known not only the materials but the processes to create such properties? Even more baffling was the city's use of dissimilar metals joined together seamlessly. In modern industry, welding different metals without creating weak points or fractures requires advanced techniques and often specialized atmospheres to prevent oxidation. But in the ruins, archaeologists found countless examples of copper-based alloys perfectly bonded to iron-based alloys, or rare earth-infused panels joined to high nickel frames, joints so clean that even under a microscope no weld bead or adhesive residue could be detected. The materials behaved as if they had been fused at the molecular level, their atomic lattices aligned as though grown together from a single melt. Some of the city's metal objects were clearly utilitarian tools, containers, reinforcement plates. Others, however, hinted at purposes lost to time. Long, slender rods made of a cobalt-tinted alloy were found in clusters beneath plaza floors, aligned with precise angular separations. They were not decorative and bore no signs of mechanical wear, yet their arrangement suggested they had been deliberately installed as part of a larger, hidden system. Elsewhere, flat, circular discs of a golden-hued metal were discovered embedded in wall panels, their surfaces etched with microscopic grooves that resisted corrosion despite centuries underground. One researcher quietly remarked that the grooves were uncannily similar to the data tracks on a modern optical disc. The team's metallurgists were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. These alloys could not have been made with primitive furnaces or hammered into shape with stone tools. The processes implied controlled atmosphere, precision melting points, repeated refining cycles were more aligned with modern metallurgical plants than with open hearth smelting. And yet, the sheer quantity of metal throughout the city suggested these processes were not reserved for elite objects or ceremonial artifacts. They were the everyday building material of an entire civilization. Here, too, the contrast between mainstream history and the evidence was stark. According to the established timeline, ancient metallurgy evolved slowly from the first use of native copper to the smelting of tin and copper into bronze to the eventual mastery of iron. High-alloy steels and advanced composites were supposed to be the exclusive achievement of the last 2 centuries, but the buried city appeared to have skipped every intermediate step, leaping directly into a technological tier that rivaled, and in some ways surpassed, our own. As news of these findings spread through academic circles, the reactions followed a predictable pattern. Official statements stressed that more research is needed and warned against premature conclusions. But in private conversations, even seasoned archaeologists admitted the evidence was impossible to reconcile with the standard model. Was this the legacy of an unknown culture that had independently discovered metallurgy's deepest secrets? Or was it the remnant of a far older, advanced civilization whose knowledge survived only in this one improbable outpost? For now, the metallurgy remained a puzzle with no comfortable answer. And yet, the team knew that the metals themselves were only part of the story. The way they had been shaped, arranged, and possibly even programmed for specific purposes suggested that the city's builders saw metal not just as a material but as a medium, something that could carry energy, information, and meaning. What that meant, and how it tied into the broader mystery of the city's rise and fall would become the next focus of their search. The city's layout revealed another layer of sophistication that confounded every expectation of early urban planning. Unlike known Neolithic or early Bronze Age settlements, which tended to grow organically, expanding in irregular clusters around water sources or defensive sites, this city displayed a deliberate, almost mathematical precision. Streets ran in straight lines for hundreds of meters, intersecting at exact angles to form a grid so consistent it rivaled the planning of later Roman cities. The plazas were centrally located, scaled to accommodate thousands of people and positioned in such a way that sunlight and prevailing winds would have moved predictably through them, providing illumination, ventilation, and comfort. It was a city that had been conceived as a whole before a single stone, or in this case metal panel, was laid. Archaeologists quickly noticed patterns in the street widths, tower placements, and the spacing between major buildings that suggested more than just aesthetic choice. Some avenues aligned with astronomical markers, the rising sun at solstices, specific constellations, or the lunar cycle. This hinted that the city's architects may have integrated a form of celestial navigation or calendar system directly into the urban fabric. In other areas, channels ran beneath the streets in systematic grids, their purpose initially unclear. Only later tests suggested they may have transported water, air, or some form of energy, exploiting gravity and structural conductivity in ways that modern urban designers would find striking. The planning extended vertically as well. Many of the taller towers were connected by elevated walkways, allowing inhabitants to move above street level with ease. Bridges linked plazas to temples, residential areas, and civic halls, creating a layered network of movement that optimized traffic and social interaction. Unlike most ancient cities, where chaos often governed the flow of people, this metropolis had managed to combine utility and elegance, balancing density with openness. Scholars described it as an early form of smart urban design, though that term hardly captured the mystery. It was as if the city had been designed by someone with knowledge of physics, architecture, and social engineering, far beyond what we attribute to humanity at that time. Central plazas contained raised platforms and what appeared to be staging areas, possibly for markets, ceremonies, or public gatherings. The surfaces of these plazas were paved with the same seamless metallic panels found throughout the city, some engraved with abstract patterns, others with symbols that may have represented ownership, social hierarchy, or records of trade. No writing was yet decipherable, but the consistency and repetition of certain motifs hinted at a structured system of communication. It was clear that these spaces were not decorative afterthoughts. They were central to the functioning of a society that had mastered both materials and organization. Residential districts, surprisingly uniform in size and layout, surrounded the civic centers. Homes were constructed of metal panels shaped into walls, floors, and roofs, with interior spaces scaled for individual or family use. Unlike the cramped, irregular dwellings of contemporary Neolithic towns, these structures provided light, ventilation, and thermal efficiency, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of both comfort and practicality. Some houses contained small embedded storage vaults made of harder alloys, possibly for valuables or perishables, further evidence of planning and foresight. Even the peripheral zones of the city, what might be considered industrial or production areas, displayed remarkable order. Smelting chambers, for example, were situated downwind of residential quarters, with channels that directed heat and fumes away from the streets. Workshops contained tools and furnaces carefully arranged for efficiency, and evidence suggested the use of mechanical aids for lifting heavy metal ingots, rudimentary cranes, levers, and pulleys designed with precision. These features indicated a level of engineering sophistication that should have been impossible at the time, reinforcing the idea that this civilization had achieved not only technical mastery, but also a systematic approach to urban living. The contrast between this city's design and what history tells us about early settlements is stark. Conventional wisdom assumes that Neolithic and early Bronze Age towns were constrained by rudimentary technology, organic materials, and basic social organization. Streets were winding, buildings uneven, and urban planning minimal. Here, every element spoke of intention, foresight, and a command of both physics and metallurgy. The city's planners had not merely built structures, they had built a coherent ecosystem, integrating residential, industrial, civic, and ceremonial spaces into a unified whole. Yet, As the team explored the city, a growing question haunted them: why had such a sophisticated civilization vanished without leaving a trace? There were no signs of warfare, widespread destruction, or epidemic, no mass graves, collapsed fortifications, or scorched districts. Instead, it seemed the inhabitants had simply disappeared, leaving their metal streets, towers, and infrastructure intact. Theories ranged from environmental catastrophe to deliberate migration, but none could fully explain the absence of artifacts typically associated with large populations: pottery, tools, clothing remnants, beyond what was preserved in sealed chambers. This meticulous urban planning, combined with the advanced metallurgy, reinforced a central truth: the city was not an accident. It was an intentional creation of a society with knowledge and skills that history has otherwise erased. Its discovery challenges the linear narrative of human development, suggesting that the story of civilization is far more complex than textbooks admit. And as researchers mapped the full extent of its streets, plazas, and towers, they realized that understanding the city's layout was only the first step. Beneath the surface, in hidden channels, chambers, and metallic conduits, lay clues to the society's knowledge, its economy, and perhaps even the reason for its disappearance. The city, in essence, was a puzzle on multiple scales: material, structural, and social. Every street, tower, and plaza was a piece, and the challenge for archaeologists was to assemble them into a coherent narrative. Only by understanding the layout in its totality could they hope to approach the deeper mysteries: how the inhabitants lived, what they valued, and why they chose to leave behind a city that would outlast millennia, gleaming beneath sands that erased everything else. The contrast between this hidden urban marvel and the accepted story of early human settlements could not have been starker, and every step taken along its metal avenues brought researchers closer to a truth that might rewrite the history of civilization itself. Buried within the metallic skeleton of the city, archaeologists began uncovering artifacts that hinted at a culture both familiar and utterly alien. Small tools, personal ornaments, and fragments of everyday objects were crafted with the same precision and sophistication as the city itself, suggesting that metallurgy permeated every aspect of life, not just monumental construction. Needles, hooks, and combs were forged from alloys that were lightweight yet incredibly strong, often incorporating the same rare earth elements found in the structural components. These items were not merely functional; their surfaces were engraved with delicate patterns, repeating geometric motifs that seemed to follow a symbolic or perhaps linguistic system still indecipherable. Pottery and ceramic items, though sparse, also bore traces of metallic inlay. Bowls, jars, and cooking vessels displayed thin bands of copper or silver woven into their surfaces in decorative, and possibly functional, configurations. Residue analysis revealed that some of these vessels had been used to store liquids with unusual chemical compositions, hinting at experimentation with substances we might now classify as early chemical processes. Certain pigments found in remnants of wall decorations incorporated metal flakes that reflected light in subtle ways, indicating a sophisticated understanding of both aesthetics and optical effects. Among the most surprising finds were fragments of what appeared to be written communication or record keeping. Etched onto thin metallic sheets, these markings were linear but did not resemble any known script. Repetition and spacing suggested an intentional system, possibly encoding information about trade, resource management, or ceremonial practices. Some researchers speculated that the writing might serve as a ledger or symbolic map of the city's infrastructure, noting positions of workshops, water channels, and plazas. If true, these inscriptions would imply a level of administrative complexity far beyond what was expected from a civilization of this age. Personal adornments added another layer to the story. Jewelry, pins, and ornamental amulets were crafted from alloys that retained their luster over millennia, often inlaid with small iridescent stones or metal composites that shifted color under different lighting. These items suggested a culture that valued both artistry and identity, signaling social status, religious affiliation, or professional roles. Some amulets bore abstract designs consistent with symbols found on street panels and plazas, hinting at a shared symbolic language permeating both public and private spaces. Weapons and defensive tools, though less common, further complicated the narrative. Short blades, arrowheads, and small shields were constructed from high-strength alloys with edges that remained sharp despite the passage of thousands of years. Interestingly, they were rarely found in the streets or open areas, suggesting they were stored in designated zones or perhaps intended for ceremonial purposes rather than regular combat. The scarcity of conventional weapons, combined with the absence of destruction layers, reinforced the puzzle. This was a city of advanced people who had mastered their materials but had not left clear signs of violent conflict. Even mundane items revealed traces of unknown sophistication. Cooking utensils exhibited heat-resistant alloys that minimized thermal transfer, implying advanced understanding of thermodynamics. Storage containers featured interlocking lids that formed airtight seals, preserving contents remarkably well despite centuries underground. Some tools had multifunctional designs, combining tasks such as cutting, scraping, or measuring into a single implement. The craftsmanship indicated not just skill but deliberate intent to optimize efficiency, a hallmark of a society that valued both practicality and precision. The artifact's metallurgical consistency was striking. Across workshops, homes, and public spaces, the same alloys, ratios, and fabrication techniques recurred. This uniformity implied centralized knowledge or codified methods, perhaps maintained through guilds, apprenticeships, or written instruction. Unlike the gradual regional variations seen in contemporary cultures, this city displayed a cohesion that suggested either isolation from surrounding groups or a deliberate choice to standardize materials and techniques. Organic traces, though rare, were equally illuminating. Researchers discovered fragments of cloth, ropes, and leather embedded in sealed chambers or metallic containers. Analysis showed that some fabrics had been treated with metal salts, possibly to increase durability or impart color, hinting at chemical knowledge that anticipated much later industrial processes. Even dietary remnants, charred seeds, grains, and tiny residues in cooking vessels revealed selective cultivation and storage strategies that indicated sophisticated agricultural practices supporting a sizable urban population. Perhaps the most enigmatic artifacts were objects whose purpose remains entirely unknown. Small, geometrically precise metallic devices with moving parts or interlocking components were unearthed in storage chambers and workshops. No comparable analogs exist in known history, and their potential function ranges from mechanical calculation to ritual use. The precision and complexity suggest intentional design, challenging the notion that this society's technology was limited to metallurgy alone. Taken together, these artifacts paint a picture of a civilization that integrated metal mastery into every facet of life, from construction and art to communication, domestic routines, and possibly even computation. The hidden city was not merely an architectural wonder, it was a hub of technological, social, and cultural sophistication. Its rediscovery forces a re-evaluation of assumptions about what humans were capable of thousands of years ago, exposing a hidden chapter in history that questions the linear regression of technological development. Beneath the streets and inside the metallic walls of the city, an intricate network of conduits and channels hinted at a hidden infrastructure that went far beyond water or sewage management. As archaeologists uncovered these subterranean and embedded systems, patterns emerged that suggested energy transmission or fluid dynamics of a sophistication previously unimagined for a civilization of this age. Narrow channels perfectly aligned across multiple city blocks were often connected to cylindrical shafts running deep into foundations, their interiors polished to a mirror-like finish. Some shafts led to sealed chambers where metal components had been carefully positioned with geometric precision, implying that the builders were directing, controlling, or harnessing forces in ways that remain mysterious even today. Early hypotheses attempted to interpret these channels through the lens of known ancient technologies. Perhaps they were aqueducts or irrigation systems, meant to distribute water from distant sources. Some proposed airflow conduits designed to cool or ventilate interior spaces during scorching desert heat. Yet repeated tests and simulations suggested that the scale, alignment, and material composition of the conduits far exceeded what would be required for ordinary fluid transport. In certain segments, channels were lined with alloys whose thermal and conductive properties were anomalously high, implying they were intended to carry not just water or air, but energy, or some other form of flow that we do not yet understand. Some researchers began to entertain more radical possibilities. Could these channels have been part of a primitive electrical system, capable of distributing energy throughout the city? The presence of rare earth elements in the alloys, combined with the near-perfect alignment of conductors, seemed to support this notion. Small metallic nodes found along the channels resembled connectors or terminals, their arrangement suggesting they could interact with other components like switches or regulators. Even more perplexing were the chambers containing cylindrical rods of unknown alloys, positioned in parallel and encased in protective metal frameworks. Their spacing and alignment hinted at resonance or energy storage, perhaps functioning as capacitors or conductors of a kind that the modern world would recognize only in the last century. The city's design also incorporated vertical integration of these systems. Shafts running through multiple floors connected workshops, residential areas, and civic spaces. In several towers, conduits spiraled upward alongside staircases or elevators, implying that energy or fluid movement was carefully choreographed to serve both functional and social purposes. It was as though the entire urban infrastructure had been conceived as a single interconnected organism, with every channel, shaft, and node serving a precise role in sustaining life, labor, or perhaps even ceremonial practice. In workshops and industrial districts, the conduits often connected to larger metallic vats, furnaces, or containment units. Analysis suggested that some could have been used to heat or cool metals, regulate pressure, or direct chemical reactions, but many features had no parallel in known metallurgy or industrial archaeology. Some chambers contained interlocking metallic panels with no visible entry points, their interiors smooth and seemingly self-contained. Others displayed suspended rods or discs aligned in repeating geometric patterns, configurations that hinted at a deep understanding of resonance, vibration, or energy storage. The pattern extended to residential and ceremonial spaces. Some homes contained small metallic nodes embedded in floors or walls, often in locations that aligned with central shafts or major conduits. Plazas and public spaces incorporated raised metallic plates, whose orientation suggested intentional alignment with underground channels. In certain areas, faint traces of a now-vanished substance were detected on the surfaces of conduits and nodes, possibly an organic or metallic medium that facilitated energy transmission. While the purpose remained speculative, the consistency and distribution of these systems strongly implied deliberate engineering rather than decorative or accidental design. Historical parallels fail to provide clarity. No known Neolithic or early Bronze Age settlement exhibits anything comparable. Ancient civilizations had mastered irrigation, water lifting devices, and basic furnaces, but nothing resembling the integrated network observed here. The uniformity, material choice, and apparent purpose of these conduits challenge assumptions about the evolution of technology, hinting that the city's builders possessed not only advanced metallurgy, but also conceptual frameworks for energy manipulation that were millennia ahead of their time. This hidden infrastructure raises profound questions about daily life in the city. If energy or other flows were actively managed, what was their purpose? Were they powering tools, lights, or some unknown devices? Were they ritualized in some way, designed to interact with the social or religious life of the inhabitants, evidence remains tantalizingly incomplete. Still, the channels, shafts, and nodes collectively paint a picture of a civilization that had not only mastered materials, but had also designed a city capable of harnessing and distributing forces in a controlled, sophisticated manner. The discovery of these systems deepens the contrast between what is known of human prehistory and the hidden truths emerging from beneath the sands. While mainstream history describes small, rudimentary villages evolving gradually into urban centers, this city suggests a society that had already solved complex engineering problems before the wheel became widespread or before large-scale written records existed. In doing so, it challenges not just the technological timeline, but the very assumptions about human ingenuity, organization, and ambition during the deep past. As excavation continues, the energy networks remain one of the most enigmatic elements of the city. Every exposed conduit or shaft is a potential clue, each node a possible key to understanding how this civilization functioned. The interplay of metal, geometry, and alignment hints at knowledge long lost, a hidden science buried alongside a society whose brilliance we are only beginning to glimpse. And yet, for all the revelations, the purpose of these systems, and the reason they were abandoned or sealed, remains an open, haunting question, awaiting the next phase of discovery. Religious and ceremonial life in the city, as glimpsed through its architecture and artifacts, revealed a dimension of culture as advanced and enigmatic as its metallurgy. Unlike other early civilizations, where temples and shrines were often constructed from stone or clay and decorated with easily decayed materials, the ceremonial spaces here were built entirely of metal, their surfaces engraved with intricate patterns, geometric motifs, and abstract symbols whose meaning has so far eluded scholars. Elevated platforms, possibly used for gatherings, rites, or astronomical observations, were carefully aligned with the city's major axes and celestial markers, suggesting a belief system intertwined with both the cosmos and the urban landscape. The design of these spaces indicated that rituals were not afterthoughts, but central to daily life, integrating community, governance, and spirituality in a seamless experience. Some of the most striking ceremonial artifacts were metallic statues and figurines found in sealed chambers and central plazas. Though corroded slightly by time, the craftsmanship was extraordinary, smooth, lifelike forms with precise articulation, some depicting human figures, others abstract shapes that hinted at mythological or symbolic representation. Each seemed to incorporate alloys with subtle optical effects, surfaces that reflected light differently depending on the viewer's perspective, suggesting intentional manipulation to create awe, focus, or even ritual illumination during ceremonies. The sheer artistry indicated not only technical mastery, but also a deep symbolic cultures, one that fused technology, aesthetics, and spiritual practice into objects meant to endure. In addition to visual symbols, researchers found traces of materials that may have been used in ceremonial activities, powders, residues, and chemical traces embedded in metal containers or etched onto plates. Some substances appear to have been used for incense, dyes, or ritual liquids, though their exact composition remains uncertain. The placement of these items within the city's spatial layout, often near channels or conduits, suggests that the builders may have integrated sensory experiences, sound, light, motion, and possibly energy, into their rituals. It's conceivable that ceremonial life here was multidimensional, blending architecture, material science, and symbolic action in ways unparalleled in recorded history. The orientation of ceremonial spaces further underscores the sophistication of this society. Many platforms, towers, and plazas were positioned to align with solstices, equinoxes, or significant stellar events, creating a predictable interaction between sunlight, shadows, and the reflective metal surfaces. Some elevated terraces featured latticework or metallic panels whose reflections may have projected moving patterns across the plazas, amplifying the visual and symbolic impact of rituals. Scholars argue that these designs indicate a culture deeply attuned to natural cycles and astronomical phenomena, integrating scientific observation with spiritual expression in a manner far more sophisticated than contemporaneous settlements. Artifacts also hint at structured hierarchy and social organization within religious practice. Certain objects, ornamental staffs, ceremonial knives, or metallic amulets, appear to have been reserved for specific individuals, perhaps priests, leaders, or ritual specialists. The consistency of these items across different districts implies codified roles, suggesting that the society's spiritual framework was formalized rather than ad hoc. At the same time, public plazas and open platforms imply communal participation, indicating a balance between elite ritual authority and inclusive ceremonial engagement. Yet, despite the precision and grandeur of these spaces, there are anomalies that defy easy interpretation. Metallic conduits often connect or pass beneath ceremonial platforms, sometimes terminating in nodes or chambers whose purpose remains unknown. Could these have been designed to channel energy, sound, or other phenomena as part of ritual practice? Some researchers speculate that the interplay of reflective metals and conduits may have produced effects, light amplification, sound resonance, or even electrical phenomena that enhance ceremonial experiences in ways we can barely imagine. If true, this would represent a form of technological ritualism, a blending of engineering and spirituality unprecedented in human history. The contrast with contemporary civilizations is striking. While the Neolithic and Bronze Age societies of the era focused primarily on survival, rudimentary agriculture, and localized spiritual practices, this city demonstrates a deliberate investment in both technological mastery and ceremonial sophistication. Here, rituals were not peripheral, they were deeply embedded in urban planning, material culture. The ceremonial life of the city seems inseparable from its other achievements, suggesting a worldview in which material, social, and spiritual realms were interconnected. Archaeologists also note the absence of iconography associated with warfare or conquest within these ceremonial contexts. Unlike neighboring cultures, where temples often commemorate victories or divine sanction of rulers, this city's sacred spaces emphasize harmony, alignment, and abstract symbolism. This raises profound questions about the values of its inhabitants. Were they a peaceful society, oriented toward knowledge, craft, and cosmic observation, rather than territorial expansion, or did they simply encode conflict and power in ways we have yet to decipher? Ultimately, the city's religious and ceremonial dimension reinforces the sense of a civilization operating at a level far beyond its supposed era. The integration of advanced metallurgy, precise architecture, and possibly even hidden energy systems into ritual practice suggests a culture that understood the interplay between material, human, and cosmic forces in ways modern science is only beginning to explore. These discoveries challenge conventional assumptions about early societies and point to a hidden sophistication that history has almost entirely forgotten, leaving only this metallic city as a testament to its creator's ingenuity and vision. Trade and economic activity within the city reveal another dimension of its hidden sophistication, suggesting a civilization not only technologically advanced, but also highly organized in terms of resource management, production, and distribution. Excavations uncovered workshops, storage facilities, and marketplaces arranged in ways that maximize efficiency, yet the scale and integration of these spaces surpass anything known from contemporaneous settlements. The uniformity of metal alloys across residential, industrial, and ceremonial contexts indicates centralized control over raw materials, while the repetition of tool and ornament designs points to standardized production methods. These patterns imply a system of mass manufacture and distribution, a level of economic coordination that challenges assumptions about early human societies. Artifacts indicate a complex division of labor. Specialized workshops were dedicated to smelting, forging, and shaping metals, while others focused on creating tools, personal items, or ritual objects. Some workshops were clustered near storage zones with embedded metallic channels, suggesting the existence of a logistical network that efficiently moved materials across the city. The alignment of conduits with both residential and industrial sectors hints at centralized planning and possibly energy-assisted operations, enabling high productivity without the use of modern machinery. Even mundane tools demonstrate precision and standardization, pointing to a skilled workforce operating under strict quality control. Market areas in the city were laid out with strategic intent. Raised platforms, wide streets, and interconnected plazas allowed for smooth circulation of people, goods, and possibly resources channeled through the city's metallic infrastructure. In some locations, metallic containers and storage units were discovered beneath plaza floors, aligned with conduits that may have facilitated transport or preservation of goods. The repeated geometric markings on containers and streets could have served as a coded system for inventory management or trade regulation, indicating an economic intelligence far beyond the capabilities of contemporary societies. The variety of artifacts suggests active trade networks. Metals found in the city include rare elements not locally available, implying that the inhabitants either sourced them from distant regions or possessed knowledge of advanced extraction and refinement. Decorative items, pigments, and possibly exotic organic materials hint at exchange with external groups or expeditions to gather rare resources. Combined with the city's uniformity and central planning, these findings suggest a sophisticated economy capable of both production and long-distance exchange, challenging the notion that early societies were small, self-contained, and technologically limited. Evidence also points to a form of wealth storage and record-keeping. Sealed chambers containing standardized metal ingots, tools, and ornaments suggest a regulated system for resource allocation. Some metallic plates exhibit inscriptions or markings that could represent quantities, ownership, or transaction records, hinting at the use of proto-accounting methods. Such organization implies both literacy, or a symbolic notation system, and administrative oversight, further reinforcing the picture of a society capable of complex governance and economic management. Interestingly, despite the city's industrial sophistication, archaeologists have found little evidence of environmental degradation, often associated with high-production societies. Workshops were strategically placed with conduits designed to direct heat, fumes, and possibly waste materials away from living areas, indicating an understanding of public health and urban hygiene. This attention to environmental integration contrasts sharply with other early civilizations, where industrial and residential areas frequently overlapped, creating hazards and inefficiencies. The integration of trade, production, and urban planning suggests a society that understood efficiency, standardization, and sustainability long before such concepts were formalized in modern economics or engineering. The hidden city was not just technologically advanced, it was economically intelligent, with systems in place to manage materials, labor, and distribution in a way that maximized output while maintaining urban harmony. The contrast with known history is stark. While the conventional narrative places large-scale trade, standardized production, and administrative oversight thousands of years later, this city demonstrates these capabilities nearly 7,500 years ago. Its existence forces a reconsideration of economic and social development timelines, suggesting that ancient humans were capable of integrated, large-scale urban economies far earlier than previously believed. As researchers continue to map the city's industrial zones and trace the pathways of its economic infrastructure, the evidence points to a civilization that was not only advanced in metallurgy and architecture, but also in the management of resources, labor, and trade. Each artifact, conduit, and storage chamber adds another piece to the puzzle, revealing a hidden society whose mastery of both material and organizational systems challenges every assumption about the trajectory of human history. Religious and ceremonial life within the Metal City reveals a world where technology and spirituality were intertwined in ways that defy the conventional separation of the sacred and the practical. Excavations have uncovered monumental halls with walls and ceilings lined in gleaming alloys, their surfaces etched with patterns that catch and reflect light in shifting, almost hypnotic ways. In the center of these vast chambers stand altar-like structures made entirely of a silvery gold composite, unblemished despite thousands of years underground. Unlike the stone temples of other ancient cultures, these metallic sanctuaries seem designed not merely for worship, but for sensory immersion. Light, sound, and even vibration appear to have been deliberately orchestrated to produce an overwhelming spiritual experience. The arrangement of ceremonial spaces follows a pattern both geometric and astronomical. Main ceremonial halls align precisely with solstice and equinox sunrises, while secondary chambers are oriented toward key constellations visible in the ancient night sky. Narrow metallic conduits run beneath these structures, some terminating in hollow plates that could have amplified sound or channeled resonance throughout the chamber. This has led some researchers to speculate that ceremonies may have incorporated acoustic effects, possibly using harmonic frequencies to heighten states of awareness among participants. Others suggest that the metallic surfaces themselves could have served as conduits for energy, whether symbolic, electrical, or something yet unknown, turning the act of worship into a technologically assisted event. Iconography within these sacred sites blends familiar motifs, sun disks, crescent moons, and animal figures with entirely unique symbols whose meaning remains elusive. Some of these symbols are repeated not only on walls but also on ceremonial tools, metallic staffs, and intricate pendants worn by what are presumed to be priestly figures. The craftsmanship of these ritual objects surpasses even that of the city's industrial tools, suggesting their creation required master artisans and possibly secret metallurgical techniques known only to a select few. The objects' wear patterns indicate they were not everyday items but used only during specific ceremonies, likely linked to seasonal cycles or significant celestial events. One of the most enigmatic finds is a series of light bowls, shallow, highly polished metallic dishes discovered in the inner sanctuary. When positioned under direct sunlight or flame, they reflect and concentrate light into intense beams, capable of illuminating an entire chamber with a focused, almost supernatural brilliance. While some archaeologists interpret them as symbolic representations of the sun, others wonder if they had practical ritual uses, perhaps in signaling or in enhancing the sensory impact of ceremonies. The relationship between the ceremonial sector and the rest of the city appears deeply integrated. Wide, metal-paved processional avenues lead directly from residential and industrial zones to the central sanctuary, implying that public participation in religious life was both expected and facilitated. Yet within the sanctuaries themselves, layers of privacy exist: outer courts for the general population, inner halls for select initiates, and sealed chambers accessible only to the highest-ranking figures. This suggests a hierarchy in spiritual life that mirrored, and perhaps reinforced, the city's broader social and political structure. The most startling aspect of these discoveries is the fusion of technology with the sacred. In known ancient civilizations, religious architecture was primarily symbolic, crafted from stone, clay, or wood, and designed to evoke awe through scale or artistry. Here the awe is magnified through an advanced mastery of metallurgy, acoustics, and light manipulation, creating environments that could profoundly affect the senses. This raises questions about whether the city's leaders, likely a blend of rulers and priest-technologists used these effects purely for spiritual elevation or as a means of social control. In the context of hidden truths, the ceremonial sector challenges the conventional narrative that spirituality and science developed along separate paths. Instead, it suggests that for this ancient society, they were inseparable, that religious practice was enhanced, even made possible by technological sophistication. This reframes our understanding of early belief systems, showing them not as primitive superstition, but as complex, integrated experiences, rooted in both the physical and the metaphysical. As excavations continue, the sanctuaries may yet yield more secrets, whether inscriptions that unlock the meaning of the city's unique symbols, or mechanisms that reveal how ancient metallurgy and energy use were woven into the spiritual heart of this extraordinary civilization. What is already clear is that the city's religious life was not an ornamental afterthought, but a central, technologically enriched pillar of its identity, offering a vision of ancient spirituality that is as dazzling as it is mysterious. Education, knowledge transmission, and intellectual life in the city appear to have been as advanced and meticulously organized as its architecture, metallurgy, and ceremonial practices. Evidence suggests that the inhabitants valued not only practical skills but also the codification and preservation of knowledge, creating systems that ensured expertise could be shared across generations. Workshops, residential quarters, and ceremonial areas alike contain metallic tablets, panels, and small instruments that appear to have been used for teaching or record-keeping. Unlike the simple mnemonic devices or pictograms found in contemporaneous cultures, these artifacts indicate structured methods of instruction, possibly combining text, symbols, and even interactive mechanical elements. Some metallic tablets show repeated geometric patterns and sequences, suggesting they could have functioned as teaching aids for mathematics, engineering, or metallurgy. Others bear abstract symbols aligned with celestial markers, implying lessons in astronomy or timekeeping. Portable tools, small compasses, styluses, and measuring devices have been found alongside these tablets, indicating a hands-on, experiential approach to learning. This blend of theory and practice points to an educational philosophy far beyond rote memorization or oral tradition, emphasizing mastery through observation, manipulation, and repeated practice. Spatial design also supports the notion of structured learning. Certain districts of the city contain clustered workshops and classrooms adjacent to both residential and industrial zones, suggesting apprentices and students could observe masters at work while practicing under supervision. Elevated walkways and transparent or highly polished metallic partitions allowed for oversight, enabling instructors to monitor multiple learners simultaneously. These arrangements imply a highly organized approach to knowledge transfer, one that optimized efficiency while maintaining a rigorous standard of skill acquisition. Artifacts hint that this society also encoded abstract concepts into physical forms. Small interlocking metallic components found in instructional chambers may have been used to teach principles of geometry, physics, or mechanical advantage. The precision with which these components were manufactured demonstrates that the city's educators expected learners to engage with complex principles using tangible models, an early form of applied science education. Even ceremonial objects may have served dual purposes, functioning both as ritual instruments and as teaching tools for principles of metallurgy, optics, or energy. The presence of standardized tools and alloys throughout educational and workshop areas suggests centralized curricula or formalized methods for maintaining quality. Whether in metallurgy, architecture, or ritual construction, students appear to have been trained to replicate precise specifications, ensuring the continuity of expertise across generations. Such organization implies both a social structure that prioritized education and a recognition of the critical importance of technical mastery for survival and prosperity. Moreover, The integration of knowledge into everyday life hints at a culture where education was continuous, experiential, and intertwined with social and ceremonial obligations. Learning was not confined to isolated classrooms, it occurred in the context of labor, trade, and ritual. This holistic approach to knowledge ensured that technical, artistic, and spiritual competencies were inseparable, reflecting a worldview in which mastery of the material and metaphysical realms was both necessary and attainable. Contrasting this with our conventional understanding of early human societies highlights the hidden sophistication of the city. Most historical narratives depict knowledge transfer as informal, localized, and largely oral, with technical expertise limited to small guilds or familial lines. Here, evidence points to organized pedagogy, systematic standardization, and perhaps even codified scientific principles, an intellectual infrastructure that mirrors modern educational systems in concept, if not in technology. The challenge for researchers now is to decode these artifacts in a way that reveals not only what was taught, but how knowledge was structured and transmitted. Unlocking this educational framework could illuminate how the city achieved its technological and architectural marvels, and how such advanced expertise was maintained over generations. Ultimately, the city's approach to learning demonstrates that intellectual life was a cornerstone of its civilization, shaping its culture, sustaining its achievements, and ensuring its enduring legacy, even if its knowledge was lost to history. The city's disappearance remains one of its most haunting mysteries, an enigma that defies conventional explanations of societal collapse. Archaeologists have found no evidence of catastrophic warfare, widespread disease, or environmental disaster. The usual suspects behind the downfall of ancient civilizations, streets, workshops, and ceremonial spaces were abandoned with remarkable preservation, as if the population had left intentionally and with foreknowledge. Tools lay neatly stored, metals gleamed in their engineered alloys, and even delicate artifacts remained undisturbed, suggesting a departure that was orderly, deliberate, and unprecedented in human history. Clues to this enigmatic exodus are subtle but persistent. In residential quarters, personal items were left in situ, yet more valuable or functional objects, particularly specialized tools and ceremonial implements, were removed from public spaces. This selective abandonment implies planning. Inhabitants may have taken essential knowledge, technology, or sacred artifacts with them, leaving behind the physical city as a testament or archive. The absence of decay or looting further suggests a social cohesion and respect for order rarely observed in other ancient societies. During times of stress or migration, environmental factors, though not catastrophic, may have played a role. Soil analysis reveals gradual changes in water tables and subtle shifts in mineral composition, potentially affecting agriculture or resource extraction. While not immediately lethal, these conditions could have motivated a planned relocation, particularly for a society capable of sophisticated engineering and long-term planning. It is also possible that the city's hidden energy networks, so carefully designed, required maintenance or fuel sources that became scarce, prompting the population to seek alternatives elsewhere. The city's layout and artifacts hint at the possibility of a planned hibernation or preservation strategy. Metallic conduits, sealed chambers, and insulated storage units may have been designed to maintain structural integrity or even preserve chemical or technological processes in the absence of human caretakers. If intentional, this suggests an unprecedented foresight, an understanding that the city could endure without active management, almost as if it were a machine or repository awaiting future discovery. Some researchers speculate on more extraordinary explanations. Could the inhabitants have left to explore distant lands, carrying with them their metallurgical knowledge and ceremonial practices, or might they have been part of a civilization that transcended the limitations of their era, choosing to withdraw from a world unprepared for their technological and intellectual sophistication? While evidence for such scenarios is circumstantial, the absence of conventional collapse indicators keeps alternative theories in consideration, challenging the linear narrative of human history. The contrast between the city's advanced systems and its sudden abandonment underscores the hidden complexity of its story. Other ancient civilizations often fell due to internal strife or external pressures, leaving ruins that decay into obscurity. Here, the city's perfection, its preserved metallurgy, infrastructure, and ceremonial spaces suggests not failure but deliberate exit, a controlled conclusion to a chapter of civilization whose achievements exceeded the historical record. Ultimately, the mystery of disappearance raises profound questions about the trajectory of human knowledge and the fragility of cultural memory. The city survived millennia beneath soil and sand, preserving technological and intellectual marvels long lost to the mainstream historical record. Its inhabitants may have departed physically, but in leaving behind such a meticulously constructed urban and technological environment, they created a monument to human potential, one that challenges historians, archaeologists, and engineers alike to reconsider what is possible and what has already been achieved in the forgotten depths of prehistory. This enigma, the deliberate vanishing of an advanced civilization, sets the stage for every subsequent inquiry. Whether through further excavation, metallurgical analysis, or decoding of symbolic inscriptions, understanding why the city was abandoned may ultimately unlock the greatest secret of all, how a society so advanced could simply vanish from history, leaving only its gleaming metal streets as a whisper from a forgotten past. The city's artistic and aesthetic achievements further underscore its unparalleled sophistication, revealing a civilization that merged utility with profound visual and symbolic expression. Unlike contemporaneous cultures, whose art was often carved in stone, molded from clay, or painted on perishable surfaces, this society sculpted, engraved, and inlaid metallic masterpieces that have survived millennia with astonishing clarity. Public plazas, residential facades, and ceremonial halls all exhibit consistent patterns of geometric designs, abstract motifs, and symbolic iconography, suggesting a visual language both widely understood and deliberately employed to communicate social, spiritual, and practical concepts. Artisans demonstrated an extraordinary command of metalworking techniques. Surfaces were polished to mirror-like perfection, alloys blended to produce subtle color variations, and some panels were treated to reflect light dynamically, creating shimmering effects as the sun moved across the city. Reliefs depicting abstract figures or celestial patterns adorn walls and floors, integrating aesthetic beauty with symbolic meaning. The repetition of certain motifs across workshops, homes, and public spaces implies a standardized artistic canon, yet within that framework, individual expression flourished, each piece reflecting mastery of craft as well as cultural or ritual significance. Decorative elements extended to functional objects as well. Tools, jewelry, and domestic utensils were often engraved or inlaid with patterns mirroring the city's larger artistic themes, transforming ordinary items into carriers of cultural identity. Even conduits and structural elements, designed primarily for utility, bore stylized motifs that elevated them beyond pure functionality. This integration of art into every facet of urban life suggests a worldview in which aesthetic and practical considerations were inseparable, blurring the line between craftsmanship and cultural expression. The ceremonial sector, in particular, showcases the city's visual ingenuity. Raised platforms, altars, and metallic columns were engraved with patterns that interact with natural light, producing dramatic shadow play or subtle glimmers that may have enhanced ritual experiences. Some motifs appear aligned with celestial events, reinforcing the connection between art, astronomy, and spirituality. Scholars propose that such effects were intentional, designed to evoke awe, focus attention, or convey abstract cosmological concepts to participants, demonstrating that visual art was deeply intertwined with both knowledge and belief. Even the smallest personal items reveal aesthetic sophistication. Jewelry, pendants, and amulets incorporate alloys, stones, or reflective surfaces chosen for both visual appeal and symbolic meaning. Recurrent patterns found on these items echo those in public art, suggesting a shared visual vocabulary that reinforced cultural cohesion. The consistency and craftsmanship across scales, from monumental walls to handheld objects, indicate that art was not merely decorative, but integral to identity, communication, and the perpetuation of cultural knowledge. Contrasted with known civilizations of the same period, the city's artistic achievements are astonishing. While neighboring societies produced rudimentary pottery, carvings, or wall paintings, this city demonstrates a systematic high-precision approach to visual expression that combines technology, aesthetics, and symbolic complexity. Its art is not an afterthought or embellishment, but an inseparable component of the urban, social, and spiritual environment. The implications are profound. Art in this city was a medium for transmitting knowledge, asserting social structures, and enhancing spiritual experience. It was both utilitarian and transcendent, suggesting that its creators understood the power of visual culture to shape perception, encode information, and foster communal identity. In doing so, they redefined what it meant to inhabit a city, not merely as a space of residence and work, but as a fully integrated aesthetic, intellectual, and spiritual experience. As excavations continue, researchers are piecing together how these artistic practices influence daily life, ceremonial activity, and the preservation of knowledge. Every panel, engraving, and object serves as both evidence of technical mastery and a window into the worldview of a civilization that fused artistry with science, spirituality, and societal organization. The city's art is a silent chronicle, whispering the sophistication of a people whose achievements challenge every assumption about the creative and intellectual capacities of early human societies. The city's technological systems, beyond metallurgy and energy conduits, reveal an unexpected mastery of mechanics, hydraulics, and possibly even proto-electrical phenomena. Archaeologists have uncovered a series of devices and installations that appear to function as automated or semi-automated mechanisms, integrated seamlessly into the city's infrastructure. Some chambers contain interlocking metal gears, levers, and pulleys, suggesting knowledge of force multiplication and mechanical advantage. Others show evidence of water-driven or gravity-assisted movement, with channels, reservoirs, and ramps precisely aligned to direct flow and generate motion in a controlled fashion. The sophistication of these systems indicates not only technical expertise, but a conceptual understanding of principles that would not reappear in human history for millennia. One striking example is a set of cylindrical rods and plates found beneath public plazas and industrial zones. Their arrangement, parallel, evenly spaced, and connected by polished channels, hints at resonance or energy storage. Experiments attempting to recreate their function suggest they could have transmitted vibrations, stored mechanical energy, or even interacted with conductive metals in a way that anticipates electrical phenomena. Though the exact purpose remains speculative, the precision of these assemblies demonstrates intentional design, careful calibration, and an understanding of material properties far beyond what is expected for the era. Water and fluid management systems also showcase innovation. Beyond basic irrigation or drainage, channels are lined with alloys that resist corrosion and optimize flow, while reservoirs are strategically positioned to maintain pressure or create mechanical advantage. Some conduits connect to rotating or pivoting mechanisms that may have powered lifting devices, gates, or other moving components, effectively creating the first large-scale urban machinery. Even residential and ceremonial zones integrate smaller versions of these systems, suggesting that mechanical assistance and energy harnessing were pervasive aspects of daily life. In workshops, specialized tools reveal advanced engineering knowledge. Levers, clamps, and presses are often made from single metal castings, shaped for maximum strength and efficiency. Evidence of modular components, interchangeable parts, precisely measured rods, and standardized fasteners suggests an understanding of systems thinking where devices could be repaired, adapted, or upgraded without rebuilding from scratch. This level of planning implies not only technical skill, but also an appreciation for sustainability, maintenance, and long-term urban functionality. Acoustic and optical effects may also have been engineered using these systems. Some corridors and chambers show metallic surfaces and conduits aligned to amplify sound or direct vibrations, while reflective panels and polished surfaces interact with light to create dynamic visual effects. In ceremonial or civic contexts, these technologies could have enhanced experiences, conveying authority, spiritual significance, or social cohesion through controlled sensory impact. The contrast with contemporary civilizations is striking. While other Bronze Age societies were still developing simple machines or irrigation systems, this city integrated mechanics, hydraulics, and energy transmission into a fully operational urban ecosystem. It demonstrates a conceptual leap where engineering principles were not isolated but embedded into daily life, production, and ritual, reflecting a culture that understood technology as inseparable from social, spiritual, and economic systems. Ultimately, the city's technological ingenuity underscores a central theme. Its inhabitants were not merely skilled metalworkers or builders, they were systems thinkers. They conceived, designed, and implemented integrated networks of mechanics, energy, and materials, creating a living, functional environment that operated with efficiency and sophistication unmatched in the known history of early civilizations. The discovery of these systems challenges conventional timelines and compels a re-evaluation of human technological potential in the deep past. The city's urban planning and spatial organization reveal an astonishing level of foresight, reflecting a society that understood not only engineering and metallurgy, but also the dynamics of human behavior, social cohesion, and environmental integration. Streets are laid out in precise grids and geometric patterns, aligned with both cardinal directions and celestial events, suggesting an intentional interplay between urban functionality and cosmic observation. Public spaces, residential quarters, industrial zones, and ceremonial areas are interconnected through metallic avenues and conduits, creating a seamless flow of movement, energy, and resources throughout the city. This holistic design reflects a civilization that conceived the urban environment as a living organism, where every street, plaza, and structure serves multiple practical, social, and symbolic purposes. Residential areas demonstrate careful attention to both comfort and functionality. The homes are constructed with insulated metallic walls, polished floors, and integrated conduits for energy or air circulation. Workshops and domestic spaces are often interspersed, allowing residents to engage in production, craft, or learning within walking distance. Elevated terraces and strategically placed platforms provide both privacy and communal oversight, fostering a sense of social order while maintaining aesthetic coherence. Even minor streets and alleyways show evidence of reflective or patterned surfaces, suggesting that aesthetic considerations were embedded throughout the city, not confined to ceremonial or public spaces. Industrial and workshop zones reveal meticulous zoning. Heavy workshops are situated near primary conduits and storage facilities, optimizing the transport of raw materials and finished products. Specialized districts for metal refinement, tool production, and ceremonial object creation are separated yet interconnected, allowing both efficiency and containment of potential hazard. The integration of energy and fluid channels into these areas indicates a deliberate orchestration of resources, enabling high productivity without compromising residential safety. This level of planning implies not just technical knowledge but sophisticated governance and administrative foresight. Public plazas and communal spaces are equally carefully designed. Central squares serve multiple functions, gathering places for markets, ceremonial events, and civic announcements. Raised platforms, reflective surfaces, and aligned conduits suggest that these spaces were engineered to manipulate sound, light, and even energy flow, enhancing communication and social interaction. Pathways leading to these hubs are wide and unobstructed, facilitating large-scale movement while maintaining visual and symbolic coherence. In this way, urban planning not only supported daily life, but reinforced social, cultural, and spiritual norms. The city's integration with its environment further underscores its advanced planning. Analysis of soil, water tables, and natural mineral deposits indicates that the city was strategically positioned to optimize access to resources, minimize environmental stress, and sustain a large population. Conduits and shafts may have been designed to regulate temperature, humidity, and water flow, demonstrating environmental awareness combined with technological sophistication. The harmony between the city's layout and the natural landscape reflects a society capable of long-term strategic planning, anticipating both immediate needs and generational sustainability. Contrasted with contemporary settlements, the city's urban organization is unprecedented. Whereas most early Bronze Age societies grew organically, with streets and districts evolving haphazardly, this city demonstrates deliberate, large-scale planning executed with precision. Its spatial coherence, multifunctional design, and integration of energy, materials, and social flow suggest a level of urban intelligence that redefines what is possible for early human civilizations. Ultimately, the city's layout tells a story of vision, coordination, and holistic thinking. Its planners and builders understood the interplay between environment, technology, society, and culture, creating a living city that functioned efficiently while embodying spiritual, aesthetic, and social ideals. In doing so, they left a blueprint of urban sophistication far beyond what history has recorded, challenging assumptions about human organizational and engineering capabilities thousands of years ago. The city's metallurgy and material science stand as perhaps its most astonishing achievements, revealing knowledge and skill that surpasses what was thought possible for its time. Analysis of the alloys used throughout the city shows a deliberate combination of metals, copper, tin, silver, and trace elements, engineered to achieve specific physical properties such as strength, flexibility, and corrosion resistance. Some structures incorporate alloys that exhibit thermal conductivity, reflectivity, or hardness far beyond what was standard in contemporary Bronze Age civilizations. The precision with which these metals were cast, forged, and finished suggests not only technical expertise, but also an empirical understanding of material behavior and chemical processes. Foundries and workshops within the city reveal a level of sophistication unmatched elsewhere. Smelting facilities are integrated with conduits that may have directed airflow for temperature control, while casting molds demonstrate uniformity and precision across multiple sites. Tools and machinery show evidence of iterative refinement, implying that the city's metallurgists employed experimentation, measurement, and standardization to perfect their craft. Remarkably, metallic components in ceremonial, residential, and industrial contexts share consistent alloy compositions indicating centralized knowledge or strict adherence to metallurgical standards. Beyond practical metallurgy, evidence suggests an aesthetic and symbolic dimension. Surfaces were polished, engraved, and sometimes treated to produce reflective or color-shifting effects, blending utility with visual impact. Objects such as ritual implements, jewelry, and public installations were not only functional, but also engineered to manipulate light and create dynamic visual experiences. This fusion of science, artistry, and symbolism demonstrates a civilization that viewed material mastery as both a practical necessity and a cultural imperative. Some discoveries challenge even modern understanding. Cylindrical rods and interlocking plates suggest that the city's metallurgists may have explored concepts akin to energy storage, resonance, or conductivity. Certain alloys contain rare elements that were likely imported or processed with methods unknown in the archaeological record. Experiments attempting to replicate these materials using ancient techniques have failed, reinforcing the notion that the city's metallurgical knowledge was exceptional, perhaps lost to time. The integration of metallurgy into every aspect of city life highlights its central importance. Residential spaces, workshops, ceremonial halls, and public infrastructure all relied on metal not only for durability, but also for energy transmission, structural integrity, and symbolic significance. Unlike other early civilizations, where metal use was limited to tools or ornaments, this city demonstrates a holistic approach. Metal was a medium for technology, art, ritual, and even social organization. Contrasted with the broader historical record, the city's material science represents a hidden pinnacle of technological achievement. While conventional timelines place advanced metallurgy centuries or millennia later, here we see a civilization that had already mastered complex alloying, precision casting, and integrated material systems. The implication is profound. Humans were capable of engineering sophistication, systemic planning, and aesthetic refinement far earlier than previously acknowledged, leaving behind a legacy preserved in gleaming metal that continues to baffle scientists and historians alike. Ultimately, the city's metallurgical mastery was more than technical skill. It was a foundation for societal complexity, enabling architecture, energy systems, art, and ritual to flourish. By studying these metals, researchers not only uncover the city's hidden engineering secrets, but also gain insight into the ingenuity, ambition, and vision of a civilization that operated on a level far beyond the known historical narrative. The city's astronomical and calendrical knowledge reveals a civilization deeply attuned to the movements of the heavens, integrating cosmic observation into its urban design, rituals, and daily life. Archaeologists have identified numerous alignments between streets, plazas, and ceremonial platforms, with solstices, equinoxes, and key stellar positions, suggesting that the inhabitants used the sky as both a practical guide and a spiritual framework. Unlike contemporary societies, where early astronomical knowledge was often limited to simple tracking of seasons for agriculture, this city demonstrates precise, large-scale implementation of celestial principles in architecture, metallurgy, and ritual planning. Raised platforms, observation towers, and reflective metallic surfaces were likely employed to track the sun, moon, and stars with remarkable accuracy. Shadows cast by polished panels, conduits, and monuments may have functioned as early timekeeping devices, marking seasonal changes or signaling important ceremonial dates. Some metallic instruments resemble primitive sighting devices, indicating that the inhabitants could have conducted systematic observations, recorded patterns, and applied this knowledge to predict celestial events. The integration of these tools into the cityscape shows that astronomy was not a separate discipline, but an embedded aspect of urban life and governance. Artifacts also hint at the use of symbolic astronomy. Engraved panels, geometric motifs, and abstract designs on ceremonial objects appear to encode star patterns or lunar cycles, suggesting that astronomical knowledge was intertwined with ritual practice. Ceremonies may have been timed to coincide with celestial alignments, reinforcing social cohesion, spiritual meaning, and cosmic awareness simultaneously. This fusion of observation, symbolism, and ceremony demonstrates a level of sophistication that parallels, and in some ways exceeds, later-known ancient observatories. The city's energy networks and metallic surfaces may have further amplified its astronomical function. Polished metals could reflect sunlight into specific chambers or along conduits, creating precise illumination effects that mark temporal milestones or astronomical events. Acoustic resonance within metallic halls could also have been used to signal the passage of time or coordinate public activities with celestial cycles. These integrations suggest a civilization that perceived no strict boundary between technology, architecture, and cosmology, each element reinforcing the others in a harmonious, interconnected system. When compared with other civilizations of the era, the city's astronomical sophistication is unparalleled. While contemporaneous societies were developing rudimentary calendars or simple observatories, this city demonstrates a systematic and city-wide application of celestial knowledge. It suggests not only scientific curiosity, but also a worldview in which cosmic order, urban planning, ritual life, and daily governance were interdependent. Ultimately, the astronomical insights embedded in the city reveal a culture that understood the heavens not as distant abstractions, but as integral to social, spiritual, and technological life. By encoding celestial knowledge into architecture, metallurgy, and ritual practice, the inhabitants created a living, functional observatory that guided their civilization and preserved knowledge in ways that modern researchers are only beginning to comprehend. This hidden dimension challenges our assumptions about the intellectual capabilities of ancient societies, showing that the city's creators were both engineer and astronomer, seamlessly merging terrestrial and celestial mastery into a unified urban experience. The city's social hierarchy and governance systems offer a rare glimpse into the organizational sophistication of a civilization that predates written history as we know it. Evidence from spatial arrangements, artifact distribution, and ceremonial structures indicates a society structured with clear social roles, responsibilities, and authority, yet operating with a level of cohesion and integration rarely seen in other ancient settlements. Residences vary in size, complexity, and proximity to workshops or ceremonial centers, suggesting stratification, while the uniformity of certain public objects and infrastructure implies centralized oversight and regulation. Unlike other contemporaneous societies, where power often rested in a single ruler or elite class, this city appears to have balanced hierarchy with functional distribution, blending governance, ritual authority, and technical expertise. Ceremonial artifacts provide further insight into social roles. Certain tools, ornaments, and implements were restricted to specific areas or personnel, likely signifying rank, office, or specialized knowledge. Workshops and industrial zones appear similarly structured. Apprentices and laborers occupied one tier of the workforce, while master artisans, engineers, or technologists oversaw production and maintained standards. The coordination required to sustain metallurgy, energy systems, and urban planning points to a governing body capable of managing complex interdependencies, enforcing quality, and integrating technical and ceremonial functions into a cohesive social framework. Residential layouts reflect both privacy and oversight. Higher status dwellings are often larger, strategically positioned near ceremonial or administrative centers, and connected by polished avenues or elevated pathways that allow observation and supervision. Simultaneously, communal spaces and processional routes suggest that public participation was encouraged, allowing social cohesion to be maintained even within a stratified society. This balance between hierarchy and inclusivity may have contributed to the city's remarkable stability and the apparent absence of internal conflict evident in other ancient urban centers. The integration of governance with knowledge and ritual is particularly striking. Control of metallurgical standards, ceremonial timing, and urban infrastructure implies that leaders were not merely political figures, but also technologists and custodians of spiritual practice. Authority appears to have been legitimized through a combination of technological mastery, ritual significance, and social oversight, reinforcing compliance while promoting shared cultural values. This multifaceted approach to governance contrasts sharply with simpler leadership models found in other early civilizations, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of societal dynamics and human behavior. Moreover, the city's mechanisms for resource allocation, labor distribution, and skill transmission hint at proto-bureaucratic systems. Sealed storage chambers, metallic conduits, and standardized artifacts may have functioned as both logistical tools and markers of social or administrative responsibility. Such organization implies a culture capable of long-term planning, centralized coordination, and complex problem-solving, qualities traditionally attributed to much later periods in human history. Contrasted with the historical record, the city's governance demonstrates that early societies could achieve stability, specialization, and social complexity without written codes or hierarchical rigidity alone. Its hidden sophistication challenges assumptions about how early humans organized themselves, suggesting that intelligence, foresight, and cultural integration were already deeply embedded in societal structures. Ultimately, the city's social and governance systems reflect a civilization that harmonized hierarchy, expertise, and communal participation by integrating technical, spiritual, and administrative functions into a unified framework. Its inhabitants created a resilient, efficient, and culturally rich society, one whose organizational genius remains hidden in the gleaming metal streets, workshops, and ceremonial halls that have survived millennia.